As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
The U.S. is considering targeting the Iranian military. So U.S. officials told Politico that options being considered include attacks on Iranian personnel in Iraq and Syria or striking Iranian naval assets. So they could bomb the IRGC in Iraq or Syria or bomb the Iranian Navy. And those things risk a huge escalation. This idea that because they're not going to, I guess they're thinking, all right, we won't bomb targets inside Iran, we'll hit the Iranians around the region. Like, that's not going to escalate things. I mean, you know, they're doing this and claiming that they don't want war, but this is what they're planning. And it says those are just some of the options being considered. But I saw that in a few reports that's one of the options. So I am leaning toward that. That's probably what they're going to do, is target the IRGC in Iraq, Syria, or hit the Iranian Navy. And John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, he said that it was very possible that the U.S. would carry out what he called a tiered approach, not just a single action, but potentially multiple actions, signaling that the U.S. could carry out strikes for multiple days. You know, that this could be not just one round of airstrikes, but a pretty significant attack. And I'm guessing if they targeted the Iranians, they would also target the Shia militias as well. So again, while the U.S. is considering an attack on the Iranian military, they're also claiming that they don't want war, that they don't want a wider war in the Middle East, that they don't seek escalation. But President Biden has already launched a wider war in the region by bombing the Houthis in Yemen 10 times since January 12th and launching several rounds of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. They've done that already against the militias. And every time they do it, each strike, they say, oh, we don't want escalation. This is for deterrence. Well, it's deterred nothing. Tensions have only increased. Now American troops have been killed. So, if they go with some big attack on Iranian assets in the region, I mean, this could mean war. Kateb Hezbollah, which is one of the main Shia militias in Iraq, they have announced that they are suspending operations against U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. Kateb Hezbollah said in a statement, quote, "We announced the suspension of military and security operations against the occupation forces," end quote. The group said that it was suspending these operations because it did not want to cause embarrassment to the Iraqi government. So it sounds like they're saying they're stopping this because the Iraqi government wants them to stop, and they're right now negotiating a potential U.S. withdrawal from Iraq. But the timing, right after this drone attack is interesting. And the Pentagon has said it's going to ignore this announcement, which isn't a surprise. They said, actions speak louder than words. American troops are already dead. Now, the U.S. has said that this attack that killed the 3 Americans had the footprints of Kateb Hezbollah, but they have not officially blamed Kateb Hezbollah. So Kateb Hezbollah, they were founded in 2003 after the U.S. invaded Iraq, and they were actually on the same side as the U.S. in the war against ISIS, when ISIS, actually controlled a lot of territory. And Kateb Hezbollah is part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is a militia coalition that's part of Iraq's security forces, that's part of the Iraqi military, that falls under the command of the Iraqi government. And the U.S. has been bombing the PMF recently. So it just shows just what a mess the whole situation is, and what a mess U.S. intervention in Iraq is. So this is part of the reason why the Iraqi government has been so angry at the U.S. over these airstrikes, is because they actually killed a deputy PMF commander. And when the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Quds Force commander, in 2020 in a drone strike in Baghdad, he was killed alongside, I forget his full name, but Al-Muhandis. Al-Muhandis was he was a deputy commander of the PMF, and he was the leader of Kateb Hezbollah at the time. The EU, and this was reported by Financial Times, the EU is planning to sabotage Hungary's economy if Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocks a 50 billion euro aid package to Ukraine at a summit of EU leaders that will happen on Thursday. The plan has been outlined by EU officials in a document obtained by Financial Times, and it looks to exploit Hungary's economic weaknesses, hurt its currency, and scare off investors to hurt jobs and growth in the country. So that's what they want to do to Hungary, a fellow EU nation that does not want to go along with the proxy war in Ukraine. If Orban does not lift his veto of Ukraine aid, the EU plans to cut off all funding to Hungary. Without that funding, the document says that financial markets and European and international companies might be less interested in investing in Hungary, and that could quickly trigger a further increase of the cost of funding of the public deficit and a drop in the currency. An EU diplomat speaking to Financial Times admitted that the plan to pressure Hungary is blackmail. And in response to the report, Hungary's envoy to the EU said that Budapest does not give in to pressure and would continue to negotiate on the issue with the EU. And I know in some cases with some of the Ukraine stuff, Orban's held out a little bit, and then or sanctions on Russia, things like that, and kind of quickly gone along. But they've been trying to get this $50 billion euro aid package pushed through for a long time now. And I believe Slovakia's new leader has also said he's going to oppose this. So, if two countries are vetoing it, that could be more significant. Are they going to try to sabotage Slovakia's government too? So this 50 billion euro aid package that the EU wants to give Ukraine would be dispersed over 4 years, and this is supposed to basically fund the Ukrainian government. And Ukraine has said without this aid or without the American aid, if it doesn't get approved, they might have to make cuts to salaries for government workers. It could delay pensions. These are the kind of things that the US and the EU have been funding in Ukraine, paying pensions for government workers and things like that.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Whole spotlight on Chinese economic turmoil, where it's going, what's next, and what it means. Again, the property crisis, on and on. The Evergrande was forced to liquidate. And the number is up to almost 31%, depending on what numbers you're looking at, of China's GDP is real estate. And with every country is that when there was a boom, and they got a boom when that scumbag, murderous prick that every time he got caught with his pants down, Bill Clinton bombs way over Baghdad. You like the Yugoslav war? Yeah, one after another. He brought China into the World Trade Organization. He also gave us NAFTA, so all the manufacturing jobs went to cheaper countries. So China boomed. China's GDP was like this until they came into the World Trade Organization, then shot up. So it was overbuilt already. And then 3 years of zero COVID policy made a very bad situation much, much worse. So what it means, what the implications are, geopolitical, economic, and again, gold prices are still in the 2030, 40 range. And again, they're holding on there. They're waiting to what the Fed's going to do. The guess is they're going to hold interest rates and they're going to start lowering them in March. And we say they're definitely going to lower them. The lower interest rates go, the stronger gold becomes because it's cheaper, because the value of the dollar goes down. So it's cheaper for other nations to buy gold. And the dollar's near its end anyway because of the big debt bubble that's ready to explode, 34 trillion. And then on the oil front, oil was trading in the $77 range. Now it's up to about $83 Brent crude. And again, if this war escalates with Iran and the United States and Israel, watch Brent crude go to above $130 a barrel, and that's going to crash equity markets and economies. This is a very dangerous time. And also in this Trends Journal, we're showing how just a few companies, a few of the stocks are driving up the markets. That's right. Only a handful. So this is very serious what's going on here. Yep. America keeps going to war as a nation keeps going to shit. And you know why? Because we got a bunch of shitheads running the country. Who's your favorite shithead? Who's your favorite shithead? I'm a repulsive kid. I'm a Democrat. I like Chucky Schumer. I like Adam Shit. Hey, how about Nancy Pelosi? No. I like little Lindsey Graham. Oh, that tough boy Cotton who loves war. He had a cotton mouth. I was in the military. Yeah. Now let's see who else. Oh, Mitch McConnell. Dead in front of your fucking eyes. And now where's America going again? Ready to go to war. It's the war horses are on parade. So Biden says he has decided how to respond to Jordan attack. U.S. President Joe Biden said on Tuesday, today, that he decided how to respond to a deadly drone attack on U.S. forces. So let's look at that picture again. Look at that guy over there dressed up in that military drag with them sunglasses on and all these little medals. Hey, they stole from the Boy Scouts. There's the military fucking mindset. Salute this guy. Yeah, I salute. Here you go. Look at this fucking freak show. Hey, was he standing on a red carpet? Yep. President Biden said that he decided. It is out of his mind, Goofy. Goofy decided. Hey, how about the American people? Fuck you, Salenti. You want freedom. You don't want shitheads running and ruining your life. What kind of a shit swallower are you? You got to become like the rest of the people. Don't forget to vote. Don't forget to vote. He goes on. Again, look at your cover of the Trends Journal. America keeps going to war as the nation keeps going to shit. Oh, again, was it up to 63% of the people living paycheck to paycheck? Oh, all you young people, when I was like, everybody my age, 18, hey, poof, you're out of the house, you're in an apartment doing something, going here or going there. No more living with mommy and daddy. Can't afford to. Hey, how about all those homeless over the streets? Huh? No, bring in more migrants. Oh, the infrastructure is so terrific in this country. Hey, but we got wars to fight. Oh, because that guy's dressed up like this. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And all these fucking people in the military, they look at us as we're just privates. Oh, yeah. They got all the medals. Biden goes on. He wrote, 3 U.S. Army soldiers were killed and dozens more injured when an unmanned drone struck an American outpost in northeast Jordan near the Syrian border. Some of the articles, and this is in your Trends Journal, they say they were actually the posts that they hit were in Syria. And it's on the Syrian border. And what the fuck are we doing over there? This is important. Asked whether he holds Iran responsible for the deaths of 3 Americans, Biden said on Tuesday that he does, in the sense that they are supplying the weapons to the people who did it. Okay, they're guilty because they're supplying the weapons to the people who did it. Oh, wait a minute. So if Russian soldiers are killed, then, in a sense, America's supplying weapons to the people who did it. So then Russia could bomb America. Hey, that's according to Biden bullshit. Don't forget, swallow Biden bullshit and turn on the mainstream media.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
And I will admit, a lot of these traditional media companies have accelerated their own demise. They ignored the internet for years. They're condescending to content creators and people outside their mainstream ecosystem. They constantly kowtow to corporate and political power. They have these false and deluded notions of objectivity, which, by the way, doesn't exist. And they push a lot of really racist, sexist, regressive crap. But that's not even why a lot of them are going out of business. A lot of them are going out of business fundamentally because the economics of the media ecosystem are broken. Most news companies used to monetize by advertising, and those ad dollars have been completely subsumed by Facebook and Google and tech giants. I don't really know where that leads us other than a pretty dire place where there's really no check on corporate and political power in this country. I did write a lot about this in my book called Extremely Online. I do think that journalism is something a lot of people won't realize they miss until it's gone.
Rob, give me just right now, say, and you don't have to think that deep or hard about it, but what were, if you had to say from Trump's administration to today, what were the biggest stories? The biggest stories, if you rattle off some of them.
Well, COVID would be probably the biggest.
COVID, there's the biggest. What did the corporate press get wrong throughout COVID?
All of it?
Everything, everything, the whole thing. They got the whole thing wrong. The biggest story that's ever happened, and they got it all wrong.
And you can still, by the way, you want to talk about interesting and unearthing corruption? There should be a deadly headline to prosecute Fauci. And where's all the active journalism of how did we get this so wrong? Why were government agencies giving us such wrong information?
And how corrupt? By the way, when I say they got it all wrong, not even things that they'll deny now that they got wrong. So they'll admit, yeah, no, that was wrong. Yeah, saying that the lab leak was a racist conspiracy theory, as the New York Times called it. Yeah, none of them are saying that anymore.
You could work backwards on every piece of information that was given to us now and be writing a daily story of, well, why? Why were we told that this was going to prevent infection? Where did that come from? What department decided to make that determination? Why was it repeated? Why were we told that it wasn't out of a lab if so many why were people forced out of their jobs? Why did the head of the CDC have to leave his post because he thought that the lab leak theory had made sense?
And it's not right. And it's not just that they repeat the lies of powerful institutions or politicians. It's that they repeat the lies and then demonize any of us who actually want to question them or actually want to point out that they're lies. Like, do you remember? And I can't remember. It was like either MSNBC or CNN, I think. But where there was that one moment, it was a great moment that came out of it was like the height of COVID craziness is 2020, I think, in the summer. And the journalist points at some random guy walking down the street and goes, look, this guy here isn't wearing a mask. And the guy goes, your cameraman's not wearing a mask. And then they actually got like cell phone video footage from behind it where it's true. Her own cameraman was not wearing a mask. But then she's sitting here in front of the camera and just points at a random person whose crime was not wearing a mask outside. Okay, so there's no scientific argument ever that has ever even suggested that wearing masks, a cloth mask outside, does anything other than just make you feel uncomfortable. Do you know how many cases of COVID worldwide have been determined to be transferred from people outdoors not wearing a mask? Zero. There's not one. There's not a single one. It's just not how the virus is transmitted. Which is basic common sense. Anyway, but the point of that is that they just picked on the basis of complete pseudoscience. They just picked some random person put him on national television. You know, and I'm not saying it's legal to film people outside or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, didn't get consent. This person didn't ask to be on national television, but not only put him on national television, but put him on national television as, look what an evil, irresponsible person, while their cameraman behind the camera is doing the same thing. But to them, their viewer can't see that. They could in this case because they got the cell phone video, but they can't see that. So they're just like, you're lying through your teeth on behalf of powerful people and demonizing regular people for the crime of just trying to live his life, just go about his day without this ridiculous fucking face diaper on and a beautiful summer day at that. And so it's this type of stuff. This is why you're so hated. This is why there's so much contempt for people like you, to the point that your institutions are failing. They are collapsing. And of course, you just happen to pick COVID, but pick any of the biggest stories. I mean, look, like the story that Donald Trump, the sitting president, was in a conspiracy with a hostile foreign power, and that Vladimir Putin had stolen the election. I mean, this is a major story that you guys got completely wrong. Of course, obviously, the war in Iraq and stuff like this. But I mean, if you just name any of the biggest stories, I'll tell you where they got it all wrong. How about Ukraine? It's been telling us for the entire period of war that, number one, it was a completely unprovoked attack, which is obviously bullshit. They've been telling us that Ukraine is winning at every single phase, telling us that Ukraine is doing great, Russia's getting humiliated. That's not at all what's happening. And there's the war in Afghanistan. They did the same thing, kept telling us for years and years that, we're winning in Afghanistan. We're doing so good building up this army. It's all lies. And so, like, yes, you guys have been busted lying about everything. All of the most important issues. And
don't tread on us. When it comes to disparities, there's three views, one by the left, one by the some on the right, and one that I believe the libertarian movement should embrace. First, we have critical theory. Disparities are the result of discrimination. Genetic determinism. Disparities are the result of the races having evolved in different climates. And third, we have culturalism. This is the one libertarians should unequivocally embrace. Summarized by Niall Ferguson in his book Civilization, the West and the Rest. Institutions are, of course, in some sense, the products of culture. But because they formalize a set of norms, institutions are often one thing that keep a culture honest, determining how far it is conducive to good behavior rather than bad. To illustrate the point, the 20th century ran a series of experiments, imposing two quite different institutions on two sets of Germans in the West and East, two sets of Koreans in the North and South, and two sets of Chinese, inside and outside the People's Republic. The results were very striking and the lesson crystal clear. If you take the same people with more or less the same culture and impose communist institutions on one and capitalist institutions on another, almost immediately there will be a divergence in the way they behave. If it was all about race, we wouldn't see disparities in North and South Korea or East and West Germany. We should reject racism and embrace culturalism and the free market. Thomas Sowell summarized his findings in a book titled Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Many of the social or cultural differences between American blacks and American whites nationwide today were in antebellum times pointed out as differences between white Northerners and white Southerners. These include ways of talking, rates of crime and violence, children born out of wedlock, educational attainment, and economic initiative. While only 1/3 of the antebellum white population of the United States lived in the South, at least 90% of American blacks lived into the South on into the 20th century. In short, the great majority of blacks lived in a region with a culture that proved to be less productive and less peaceful for its inhabitants in general. Moreover, opportunities to move beyond that culture were more restricted from blacks. Wilfred Riley of Kentucky State summarizes his findings. The Black Lives Matter movement alone staged 2,406 major marches against racism in the past few years alone. However, any serious claim that contemporary or recent bigotry is the cause of phenomena such as 75% black illegitimacy rate founders on three rocks. First, these problems did not exist among blacks or anyone else when racism was much worse. Two, these problems do not exist for successful dark-skinned African and Asian immigrants to the USA. And three, many or most such problems do exist among poor whites. Therein lies another reason why racism is so counterproductive. Thomas Sowell summarizes his findings in Civil Rights, Rhetoric, or Reality. Japanese immigrants to the United States also encountered persistent and escalating discrimination, culminating in their mass internment during World War II. But by 1959, they had about equal the income of whites, and by 1969, Japanese American families were earning nearly 1/3 higher incomes than the average American family. Now let's look at where the black community was before progressives got real nice and decided to help them. Civil Rights, Rhetoric, and Reality, Sowell says, the number of blacks in professional, technical, and other high-level occupations more than doubled in the decade preceding the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In other occupations, gains by blacks were greater during the 1940s when there was practically no civil rights legislation. In various skilled trades, the income of blacks relative to whites more than doubled. Affirmative action, one of the crown jewels of the Democrats. Hiring pressures to make it more costly to have no minority employees, but continuing affirmative action pressures at the promotion and discharge phases also make it costly to have minority employees who don't work out well. The net effect is to increase the demand for highly qualified minority employees while decreasing the demand for less qualified minority employees or for those without a sufficient track record to reassure employers. Walter Williams went to the numbers. He said, today we see such a big gap between white and black youth unemployment. So since it's the cause of racism, when racism was much worse, we should see a much bigger disparity. Turns out in 1948, white youth unemployment, 10.2%, black unemployment was 9.4%. This is where the black community was before Democrats got so nice and started helping. When it comes to overrepresentation within prisons, men are like 50% of the population and 95% of those on death row, 95% of those killed by police, and 90-something of those currently in prison. This is the result of men being more violent than women. It turns out that while blacks are 13% of the population, according to the BJS, black offenders commit 52% of homicides recorded in the data between 1980 and 2008. When it comes to interracial violence, there were 500,047 black on white incidents in the year 2014 and 59,700 white on black instances of violences, according to the National Victimization Crime Survey. The progressive, who only sees things through the lens of race, has no analysis for this. One group is the oppressed and one is the oppressor, completely stripping those human beings of their individuality. Libertarians know better. Wilfred Riley says, interracial crime on an annual basis have been consistently 75 to 80% black on white for the past 30 years. More importantly, there is no horrifying epidemic of interracial crimes of any variety because 84% of white murder victims and 93% of black murder victims are killed by a mundane member of their own race. There is also disparities between lynchings in the United States, according to the Tuskegee Institute. Between 1882 and 1968, 1,297 whites were lynched, 3,446 blacks were lynched. If all you know is, I need to judge this situation by skin color, so I gotta treat Larkin Rose and Klaus Schwab the same because of their skin color, you are not actually being productive, and it's extremely counterproductive. That's why the Free State Project matters.
The founders referred to an invasion not only as a physical invasion, armies, for example, crossing borders, trying to conquer territory, etc. They also regularly, this is a very common, this wasn't just an unusual thing, this is a very common use of the word invasion. They use it to describe attacks on liberty and violations of the limits of the Constitution. And so here's a few examples of how we have massive amounts of invasions today. And the invasions are domestic. They are coming from the so-called federal government in Washington, D.C., the former general government. It is now a central government, the largest in the history of the world. And then, of course, it's vassal states, which they steal the money from the people. They steal the money, and then they divvy it out to the state governments to encourage the state governments to act as agents of the federal government. It is a really nasty system we live under, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to change that around. It's possible. It's possible. But here are some examples, just a handful of, I think, some of the biggest ones. This is an article by Judge Andrew Napolitano last October. The title's called A Constitution the Government Evades. And he's talking specifically about the FBI. He said 6 months ago, so earlier in 2023, FBI officials boasted that in 2022, their agents had spied on only 120,000 Americans without search warrants. Under the Constitution, that number should be 0. So here we are. We've got only, that's supposed to be good. We've only violated the Constitution. Now, it doesn't say how many times, but a specific number. 120,000 Americans have had their rights violated by their own government. And supposedly, we're supposed to, well, they just need to be kept in check by another part of that same government that has sanctioned this type of action in the past in many ways. And we got to rely on them to stop themselves. No, this is an invasion of 120,000 people. This should be, people should be going nuts about this kind of stuff. Anyways, Judge Knapp continues with this. This revelation is supposed to give members of Congress comfort that the folks we have hired to protect the Constitution are in fact doing so. I mean, they're got an oath to protect and preserve the Constitution. They're protecting our liberty. They're making us safe by violating the rights of just 120,000 people on one issue. Now, how many other things are they doing that on? I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but it's probably really bad. In reality, the feds continue to assault and violate a core freedom protected by the Constitution, the right to be left alone. I like that Judge Knapp uses the word assault, because an assault is oftentimes part of an invasion. They are certainly invading our rights. They are invading our liberty. They are invading the reserved powers of the sovereign people of the several states over and over and over. I think that, okay, even let's say they only use it once in a while. That's still a very dangerous situation. And in fact, John Dickinson. They called him the penman of the revolution. He wrote the most widely read series of papers on American liberty throughout the revolution, up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776. He said, some persons may think this act of no consequence because the duties are so small. A fatal error. That, and he highlighted the word that is the very circumstance most alarming to me. For I am convinced that the authors of this law would never have obtained an act to raise so trifling a sum as it must do, had they not intended by it to establish a precedent for future use. So Dickinson was repeatedly concerned about establishing what he called, in response to the Stamp Act, the detestable precedent. He made the same argument against the Stamp Act. Say, don't use this. You have to refuse to comply, because if you comply, it establishes the detestable precedent. They're never going to get rid of it, and they're just going to keep building on it and making worse and worse and worse. And he's making the same case here in response to the Townsend Acts in 1767 and 1768. And no matter how small of an invasion on your liberty it may be, it is still an invasion. And the small ones he was actually more concerned about, because the real big ones and most obvious ones he expected people to, well, throw a fit about. And we sometimes see that type of thing play out today. But then again, there's millions and millions and millions of invasions on your rights and liberties happening all day, every day. Invasions on the reserve powers of the states all day, every day. And people basically stand by and wait to put new people in power in charge of that invader in the hopes that they'll just use all that power and, well, in ways that they like. And this is one of the dumbest things I think is happening. I mean, it's embarrassingly dumb. But anyways, Dickinson continued, to console ourselves with the smallness of the duties is to walk deliberately into the snare that is set for us, praising the neatness of the workmanship. And that one of the next ones that I want to discuss might even be worse. Firearms Policy Coalition, gun policy over on X, FPC, whatever you call them, they regularly post updates about how many firearm background checks are being initiated by the FBI on a month-by-month basis. I think they may do it every month. We follow them over on X and other platforms. I recommend that you do as well. They do awesome stuff. And we don't always have to even agree either, but we really, I think they're some of the real good guys out there. But they posted here in December of 2023 that there were 2.6 million background checks in November alone, bringing the total to 2023 to 27.1 million. 27.1 initiated background checks by the federal government. And our view is, well, that's 27,123,321 violations of the Second Amendment, at least so far in 2023. It's probably got closer to 30 million. One is too many. The federal government, the number of federal gun control, federal gun checks that they're authorized to establish under the Constitution is 0. So again, this is a massive invasion. 27 million invasions on liberty. And we're supposed to sit around and be like, okay, dudes, we trust you to do the right thing. It's cool. No problem. Now, of course, all of this is still just scratching the surface. I'm talking about tens of millions of violations of the Constitution, invasions on your liberty. And this is just scratching the surface. It's happening constantly. And every agency that isn't authorized, every program, every rule, every regulation is also an invasion on your liberty. It's an invasion on the powers reserved to the states, the people, the sovereign people of the several states. And of course, once you establish one, they multiply and expand like cockroaches. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
We're doing well,
We're at it again. Yeah.
Ready and raring to solve all the problems. But they keep coming back. Now, are these the same problems that are keeping coming, or are they new ones? Sometimes it's just a continuation. The same old story for the last 30 years. Ever since the Bush administration, it seems like we've been working together since then.
Yeah, I know.
And there's a lot of similarities.
Victoria Nuland, she could not stand these rumors. Dagny Taggart put this tweet out. The United States has no plans to withdraw its troops from Syria. Here's what Victoria Nuland said, quote, "First, let me set the record straight. The United States is not withdrawing from Syria." And as we know, wherever there's trouble in the world, wherever there's murder, mayhem, and death and destruction, Victoria Nuland, blank the EU Newman, Luna is there.
It's terrible, and that should be dismissed rather easily. It shouldn't even have to be reported. But when we look at this, at least it does to me, it makes me think this is important because she's speaking for some powerful people. It's not like she's talking to herself. She has probably more authority than our president has when she tells them something. No, she is a mouthpiece. She's been around, and she's high up in both administrations, and that's where our real problem is.
And I was looking around, well, who's a good person to describe what she's really about? Of course, we turn to our friend Glenn Greenwald, and this is a tweet he put out early last year, April of 2023, when she was appearing before a House committee on the Hill. And this particular hearing, by the way, I could have played it, but what she's saying is, she says, "I'm very happy to see that the Nord Stream pipeline is a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea." Rough quote of what she said to the committee here. This was the Senate. So she's also pro-terrorism because that was a terrorist act. But Glenn Greenwald reminds us back then, Victoria Nuland worked for the Clinton administration. Then she served as Dick Cheney's senior advisor on the Iraq War. Then she worked for the Hillary and Kerry State Departments under Obama, running Ukraine. Now she runs Ukraine for Biden. The only time she wasn't in power was under Trump, which is a little bit ironic because he was supposedly the big warmonger. So here is Victoria Nuland. She's always there. She doesn't care if it's Dick Cheney or Barack Obama. As long as you're involved in war, she's ready for the assignment. Her husband, by the way, is Fred Kagan. You'll remember Fred from our hearings on the Hill from the committee when he was the one that they would trot down there. The surge is going great. Just a few more troops. 8,000-pound Fred Kagan. A few more troops, and we'll win this war.
Doesn't happen, does it?
Yeah.
There's one quote from this argument. There was a blog there that I'm going to read it, and you have to be careful because it's pretty strong.
Uh-oh.
And it says, she loves having American troops killed in places like Syria. It brings the U.S. closer to the neocon fantasy of war with Iran. She reviews members of the U.S. military as mere cattle, mere pawns. The people in charge of American foreign policy hate America. Now, where'd that come from?
Who would write that?
It's you.
Oh, no.
You did that, and you got published. Oh, boy.
My Twitter feed can be spicy at times. There should be definitely a warning on it. But I'm not a big fan of hers. It's funny how now there's a lot of jokes about it, but how all the conspiracy theories of the past are conspiracy facts. It used to be only the extremists would say, join the U.S. military, go fight and die for Israel. But now it almost looks literally like that. And I'll put this first clip up, and this is from The Intercept, and it came out yesterday. And as you point out, the article, this is Ken Klippenstein, who's a very good writer over there. U.S. military personnel in Iraq put on standby to support ground involvement in Israel's war in Gaza. Now, to clarify, this is not something that happened yesterday or the day before. What it is a document. Now go to the next one, you'll see what it is. It's a document obtained by The Intercept from the U.S. Air Force, and it describes military orders to be, quote, on standby to forward deploy to support troops in the case of on-ground U.S. involvement in the Israel-Hamas war. And that's a quote from the memo that the Air Force put out. And it was put out right after the October 7th attack, after Biden sent an additional 2,000 troops to Iraq. Those troops were apparently sent with orders to get ready to go and assist Israel in fighting in Gaza. That's apparently what it was said. So it's nothing new, but they newly got a hold of this memo. But it just goes to show what was going on behind the scenes. Just days after things happened, the first thought in Biden and his administration's mind, and the neocons that run his administration, wasn't how can we dial this down? How can we prevent this from going, regional, or if not worse? Their response is, how can we get American troops involved in this to fight for Netanyahu?
And right, and it's not ignored by a lot of people here because of the possible consequences of troops being close there or being involved. Now, the one thing that I've been impressed with, and I've mentioned this before, and that is the demonstrations that have gone on for the last several months.
Yeah.
We knew there were frictions and there's been fighting and all this, but it takes a lot to get thousands of people out there demonstrating for certain causes. But boy, there's been a lot of people demonstrating in favor of the Palestinians and having a lot of complaints about Israel. That's been sort of taboo. You're not supposed to do that. But if this expands, even this is just a warning that they're getting closer to that. It very well could expand, the dissent in this country because it's breaking up political parties. What should we do? And the demonstrations are there. The Democrats are more split on it than the Republicans. Unfortunately, the Republicans are more unified around warmongering, and a war machine. But both of them, deep down inside, when you look at it, regardless of their political party and all that's going on, they do have a nonpartisan group out there called the Deep State and the military-industrial complex. They'll work and finance anybody, Republican or Democrat or independent, and then every once in a while they get some money to a person who's called himself libertarian. Give him some money. That to me is really disgusting when people preached non-interventionism and staying out of these wars, and yet they sort of change their tune, and that's discouraging.
No one bribes us with money. Why is that the case?
Yeah, and I always liked it because while we were working in Washington, I had a couple congressmen come and say, "What is this all about? Why don't you tell me why you're doing it? How did you raise that money? We don't even know what you do." But they were sincere, and some of them even shifted but that was rare. Too bad there weren't many more.
Yeah.